What are the best house rules in Pathfinder 2nd edition? Which ones are they? And do you need to be at my house for them to apply? No, but if you come over, I'll make you a smashing cup of tea. Bring money. This is the Dominomicon, authored and hosted by me, Dominic. The Dominomicon is dedicated to all nerdy things, with my current obsession being the TTRPG Pathfinder 2nd edition. In this video chapter, I'm going to go over my top 10 house rules with a few runners up at the end for those that are probably slightly balance changing. I've had a few people ask me what house rules I apply, and honestly, these particular ones are not going to be all that surprising, though there's a few in there that are very personal to me, and I honestly would not want to play Pathfinder 2e without them. I run 3 campaigns currently, and all of my players seem to absolutely love my stupid little changes to the system. And if you're a player and you enjoy these rules, consider sharing this video with your GM. And if you do feel as though this video is worth sharing, please consider liking it, hitting the hype button, subscribing, checking out the Patreon, etc. It's all massively appreciated and really helps me keep on going. And as we're sat at my house, let's start my music. So a quick primer on house rules. These are rules that your GM may apply that slightly alter how the system functions. Of course, house rules will affect the balance of the system to some extent, so bear that in mind when considering them. Generally, they're just tiny alterations. Sometimes they can be big ones though, and of course, it's generally accepted that the whole table has to agree to them. There's not much more to explain, honestly, so let's just jump into the list. Let's start with a big one, giving everyone a free general feat at level 1. If you spent any time looking at character optimization in this system, you'll know that the human ancestry is unbelievably popular, and that's almost entirely because of the versatile heritage option that lets you nab a general feat right at the start of your adventuring career. It creates a bit of an unintended ancestry tax where players feel mechanically pressured to pick human just to get their specific build online early, which is a massive shame when Pathfinder 2e has so many weird, wonderful, and esoteric ancestries to choose from. By giving everyone a free general feat at level 1, players can freely pick whatever ancestry actually matches the character concept without worrying about falling behind the maths. And there's a brilliant knock-on effect here for customization. If a player doesn't desperately need a general feat like fleet or toughness right away, they can use this level 1 slot to grab adopted ancestry instead. This is fantastic because, let's be entirely honest, some of the ancestry feat selections for the more uncommon or rare heritages are a bit rubbish, or there just aren't very many of them to choose from. By taking adopted ancestry at level 1, you could choose human, which makes perfect sense from a lore perspective given how much humans dominate the map of Glorian anyway, and immediately start taking their excellent ancestry feats as you level up. It's a wonderful bit of structural flexibility that makes character creation far more enjoyable. Number 2 is a simple one, a much more generous version of recall knowledge. If you've watched my channel for more than 5 minutes, and you definitely should have, you know I constantly preach about how powerful recall knowledge can be. If a player spends an action to recall knowledge and rolls a failure, they get absolutely nothing. Do this a couple of times and players completely stop using the action, which is an absolute tragedy for tactical play. And to fix this and encourage my groups to actually use their brains, I've reworked the degrees of success to be way more rewarding to the players. First up, on a regular old failure, I don't just give them a blank stare and waste their action, I'll at least tell them the core traits that the creature possesses. Knowing an enemy has the undead, fiend, or fire trait is incredibly useful information without completely giving away the stat block, and it keeps the tactical momentum going. If they get a normal success, the curtains come up, I unveil exactly what the creature is, give them all of its traits, and then I hand them 2 questions to ask me. And when I say 2 questions, I mean it can literally be anything. I do not care if it's pure meta mechanics. You want to know its exact armor class, its lowest saving throw, its specific immunities, its favorite grandparent, ask away and I will give you the unfiltered truth. It's grandma, by the way, because granddad was a bit of a drinker. For a critical success, we bump that up to 3 pieces of glorious information to really reward a fantastic roll. But to keep things spicy, we have a critical failure. So if you critically fail, I will look you dead in the eye and give you 2 completely false pieces of information without telling you that they're fake, of course. It completely mimics the feeling of a success, leading to absolutely hilarious table moments where the party fighter confidently runs up to Fire Elemental thinking it has a massive weakness to cold damage, only to find out they've made a terrible mistake, like when I launched this channel. It makes the skill interactive, rewarding, and brilliant for the game. Number 3 is a neat little exploration mechanic I like to call the Readied System. And now, by the strict rules of written in PF2e, drawing a weapon or entering a stance requires a distinct action. Wielding a weapon is an interact action which carries the manipulate trait, meaning that if you kick off a combat encounter completely empty-handed, you're immediately losing precious actions on your very first turn just getting ready to fight. I find that a bit tedious when the party is actively kicking down doors and hunting monsters. To smooth this out, I split exploration states into 3 distinct categories: unprepared, cautious, or readied. If you are unprepared, it means you've been completely and utterly ambushed. You're strolling through the woods, possibly daydreaming about nice biscuits and tea combos, and bam, monsters jump out of the bushes. You start to fight with no weapons drawn and you aren't in a stance. You've caught completely off guard, which is a massive disadvantage. The baseline state for dungeon crawling, however, is cautious. This simply means that you are actively exploring a dangerous area with your weapons already drawn. And if you're playing an unarmed character like a monk or whatever, I'll happily let you start the fight already in a single stance. It completely eliminates the necessary tax of wasting your first turn's action economy on basic setup. Finally, we have the readied state. This is when the players are the ones setting up the glorious ambush. When you're readied, I'll usually hand out some lovely circumstance bonuses to your initiative rolls and maybe throw a few penalties at the unsuspecting enemies. Of course, this works the exact same way in reverse if the monsters pull off a perfect ambush against you and leave you unprepared. It adds a bit of tactical weight to how you navigate the map without making the bookkeeping annoying. Now let's be honest, if you have me as your GM, there's only so much irritation you can take. Numero 4, onto the hero point based house rules, sharing hero points. The standard rules for hero points are perfectly fine, but they do tend to encourage a little bit of hoarding. Players sit on them like a grumpy dragon on a gold pile, then frantically burn them at the end of a session on a completely irrelevant flat check just because they know they're going to reset anyway. It's a bit of a waste, honestly. So in my games, I allow the party to share them. Allies can freely offer a hero point to a teammate who's staring down a devastating critical failure, or a player can politely request a backup from the group if they're in a tight spot. Nobody's forced to give those away and nobody's forced to accept one, but the option is always on the table. This completely shifts the dynamic and makes the game feel way more cooperative. Plus, from a GM perspective, it's brilliant. If the party pulls off a massive achievement together, I don't have to pick a favorite child. I can just award a hero point to the entire team at once, knowing that they can distribute the wealth to whoever needs it most. It completely stops the hoarding and keeps everyone heavily invested in each other's roles, like a co-op game should be. On to 5, carrying on with the hero point rules, a hero point for the session recap. We've all been there as GMs. You sit down at the table, open your notes, look at your players and ask the dreaded question. So, who remembers what happened last week? Cue the absolute deafening silence as 5 grown adults suddenly find the texture of their character sheets or the ceiling tiles completely fascinating. To combat this collective amnesia, I offer a blatant bribe. At the start of every session, I let the players decide amongst themselves who wants to step up to the plate and recap the previous game. If they manage to do it well enough, they get an immediate hero point. Now, to be clear, this doesn't need to be an award-winning theatrical performance, and they don't need to recite my campaign notes back to me. In fact, I'd rather them not do that, because I've probably forgotten them anyway. They just have to give everyone a general idea of what actually occurred last time, who you spoke to, who you murdered, and why you're currently standing in a room full of fire. It's an incredibly simple way to get the entire group focused and invested right from the first minute, and it saves me from having to talk even more than I already do, even though I do love to hear my own voice clearly, or I wouldn't have a YouTube channel. Last on the hero point front, hero points carrying over if you have more than one. Now, by the strict rules as written in PF2E, any extra hero points your characters have accumulated over a game just sort of evaporate into thin air at the end of a night, and everyone resets to a baseline of 1 at the start of the next session. And I absolutely hate this because it leads to players doing this incredibly silly thing where in the last 20 minutes of the game they start panic spending their hero points on completely irrelevant skill checks just because they know they're going to lose them anyway. It completely breaks the dramatic tension and feels a bit too gamey, quite frankly. So my little change is that if you finish a session with more than 1 hero point, you just keep hold of those extra ones. Now, to keep things balanced and stop things from getting out of hand, if you start a session with 2 or 3 hero points already sitting on your character sheet, you don't gain the standard free one that everyone else gets when we kick things off. But everyone else who's sitting at 0 or 1 still gets their baseline starting point. Plus, if you do the session recap, regardless of how many hero points you have, you still gain 1. I feel like this system helps encourage players to hoard their points for truly desperate life or death moments rather than wasting them on pointless rolls, which I think is pretty cool to keep the stakes feeling real. Onwards to number 7, treating all backgrounds as deep backgrounds, meaning you can freely change the attribute boost. It obviously doesn't work exactly like the variant rule, but it's pretty similar. So, being completely honest, I generally don't like how backgrounds work in this system. Pathfinder 2e has like hundreds of backgrounds available, which sounds amazing on paper, but in practice it can be incredibly restrictive and tedious. You sit down to build a new character, you write this beautiful, intricate backstory about how they were a humble farmhand who witnessed a bizarre cosmic anomaly, and then you realize that the farmhand background mechanically forces you to boost either wisdom or constitution, but you're trying to build a highly specialized, fragile, intelligence-based wizard. So now you're stuck in this incredibly tedious loop of browsing through a massive list of options, trying to find a very specific background that happens to give the exact attribute boost your build needs, and then awkwardly backwards engineering your character's entire life story just to justify it. It completely ruins the creative process, and it forces players to change their brilliant ideas just because they want a specific attribute. And that's not how you're meant to make characters in this. Literally, player core tells you the first thing you need to do is create a character concept if you're having to change it just for an attribute boost. I don't think that's right. To fix this, I just make it irrelevant. In my games, you can pick whatever background perfectly suits your backstory for the lore and skill fee, and then you can freely choose whatever 2 attributes you want to boost, similar to the deep backgrounds variant rule I already mentioned. And so if your cloistered cleric used to be a blacksmith before they withered away into a bookworm, you can take the blacksmith background and put your boost into wisdom and intelligence or whatever. It lets the narrative dictate the mechanics rather than the other way around, and it completely eliminates character creation friction, and it stops players from having to compromise on the roleplay. It's a massive win all around. Number 8 is lore skills from backgrounds automatically scaling like the additional lore feat. When you create a character in PF2E, your background gives you a highly specific lore skill. If you pick the sailor background, you get sailing lore. If you pick barrister, you get legal lore. It's fantastic for the character flavor at level 1, but the raw mechanics of the system sort of leave these skills out in the cold as you progress. By the standard rules, that background lore stays at trained forever, unless you're going to choose to spend one of your regular skill increases on it, but let's be completely honest, no one's ever going to do that. You're always going to prioritize your main skills like athletics, medicine, occultism over a niche background skill. The unfortunate side effect of this is that by the time you reach the mid to high levels, your world-saving hero is mechanically useless at their original trade just because high-level DCs scale up automatically, leaving your trained skill mathematically in the dust. To fix this, I rule that the lore skill you get from your background automatically scales up for free, exactly like the additional lore skill fee. This means it automatically bumps up to expert at level 3, master at level 7, and legendary at level 15. It keeps your character's backstory mechanically viable throughout the entire 1 to 20 journey without forcing you to sacrifice your actual character build, which I think is entirely necessary for a system that prides itself on deep customization. Sliding into number 9 is a way to make spellcasters feel a little more powerful. Hero points exist so that a player can reroll a d20. Usually this is done when they fail a save or when they are attacking. More often than not, spellcasters tend to use save-based spells, meaning that if an enemy rolls a nat 20 or just very high on the save, they're shit out of luck. And I honestly just don't think this is particularly fair for spellcasters. I think they already have it hard enough in the system as it is. And yes, I'm aware that on a success it still does like half damage, whatever, but still. Thus, in my games, when an enemy rolls a save, you're allowed to spend a hero point to force them to re-roll it. As far as I'm concerned, it's identical to rolling a d20 for an attack or whatever. Ultimately, it's just a d20 that's being rolled that you're spending a hero point to re-roll. It's just the same to me. This does mean that spellcasters are a little bit more powerful in my campaigns, but I'm fine with that because it feels incredibly bad when you cast one of your top ranked spells against an enemy that has a weak save that you are targeting and they roll a nat 20. It just sucks. Yeah, I know, RNG and the dice rolls are the god, but I'm the GM and I'm the god of the gods, alright? Last but not per se least, Kinetic's 2-action blasts counting as strikes. Now, if you've played or GM'd for a Kineticist, you already know that they're a bit of weird anomaly in the PF2E ecosystem. They don't use traditional weapons, they don't technically cast spells, they just sort of channel the elements and chuck fire or rocks at people. Because of this, their elemental blast is categorized as its own unique action, not a strike. And mechanically, that creates some annoying gaps. For example, if you have a rogue in the party with opportune backstab, that reaction specifically triggers when an ally makes a strike. So when you Kineticist commands the literal earth to shatter an enemy's jaw in melee, and Kineticist blast in melee gets strength added to the damage roll, a rogue just stands there because rules as written, it wasn't a strike. It's also a massive headache if you're trying to use the mythic system, which just doesn't play nice with the Kineticist's unique framework whatsoever. To bridge that gap, it's entirely necessary to make a little tweak. My house rule is dead simple. If a Kineticist uses a 2-action elemental blast, it counts as a strike for the purpose of external triggers and abilities. It makes the class feel far more integrated into party combos, which is only fair, really. And if you wanted, you can make those 2-action attacks also count as cantrips for some cantrip-based triggers, etc. And that is my top 10 house rules, but let's move on to the runners-up. Now, these next few options didn't quite make the main list because they're probably slightly unbalanced, but they're still brilliant fun and can completely transform how your group interacts with the game. I'm not going to go massively into them as it's runners-up, but yeah, I'm curious to see what people think. Let's go. Non-Consumable Talismans. So first up, making talismans daily items instead of consumables. In the standard rules, talismans are single-use magic items that you affix to your gear and burn for a temporary buff, but what actually happens at most tables? Players look at them, realize they disappear forever after one use, and immediately sell them straight away because they'd rather just have the cold hard cash. To stop them from being treated as vendor trash, I house rule that talismans aren't consumable. Instead, they're usable once per day, and then they reset the next morning so that you can use them all over again. It gives your martial characters a little fun pool of daily tricks to play with, though you do have to keep an eye on it so they don't start hoarding a ridiculous number of them. Next up is Streamlined item unconsumable use. Instead of it costing 2 actions to draw an item and use it on yourself, I allow it to be 1 action. This is just because I feel like it's a little bit brutal, maybe too many actions just to pull out a healing potion and drink it. It has the manipulate tray. Most of the time, it's just barely worth doing if it's like an elixir of life or whatever. But if it's 1 action, it's actually pretty worth it, and it's kind of worth the risk as well. It also means that carrying potions, mutagen scrolls, or whatever, it's a lot more appealing when the rounds get particularly tight. So yeah, this isn't one that I'd use for every group, but it does make consumables feel more powerful. Maybe I'm just against consumables in general, because that seems to be what 2 of my runners-up are. I think it's just because players sell them immediately, and it just kind of sucks. Next is fast magic ammunition. This allows you to activate magic ammunition and load it for a single action instead of 2. Most players ignore magic ammunition because you have to pull it out for an action, and you have to activate it. It's just a lot of messing around just to load it and shoot it and stuff before you've made an attack roll. It just kind of sucks. So to make magic ammo a little bit more interesting, I rule that you can load and activate it as part of a single action. It instantly clears out that admin headache and lets your snipers and gunslingers actually shoot the cool things they find in the loot drops. The Incapacitation trait. So with just one of my campaigns, I've made it so that the Incap trait only turns critical failures into failures and nothing else. I know this is going to have pretty large implications on abilities with the Incapacitation trait, but to offset this, I've also added it to a few abilities that I think are a little bit overpowered, like fear or synesthesia or slow, etc. I honestly just think they should all have the Incap trait. It's definitely balance changing, but quite frankly, everyone hates the Incapacitation trait, and this way it's at least more tolerable and understandable. The whole point is it's meant to stop save or suck situations, and there's still some abilities in this system that are save or suck that don't have the Incap trait, which is kind of stupid in my opinion. And I generally think turning a fail into a success just because the enemy's higher level or whatever, it just doesn't feel good, especially for spellcasters and stuff. It's hard enough for them as it is. So yeah, with this rule, all it does is change crit fails into fails if the enemy is higher level, blah blah, that's it. Next is Explorer clothing, counting as light armor. There's a bunch of cool property runes in this system that if you're not an armor user, you're not allowed to use, and that kind of sucks. And that's because property runes specify whether they can go in light, medium, heavy, or all types of armor. I just think that monks, spellcasters, etc. should be able to use armor property runes if they want. Just the light ones though, no slotting in your fortification runes or whatever into your explorer's clothing. And the last and, in my opinion, best house rule, the fated moment. Definitely the most controversial house rule. Every campaign I put this into, however, people end up loving it. So once per session, so long as everyone unanimously agrees, including the GM, someone is allowed to re-roll any D20 roll, including those that have already been re-rolled because of a fortune effect or a misfortune effect. I usually suggest this when players are going to do like an ultimate ability or a really powerful new spell for the first time that really fits their character and their backstory, and they create this really cool moment, they describe it incredibly well, and then they roll an nat 1, but hey, they got a hero point, and they re-roll, and it's a nat 1 again. And it's really disappointing. And remember, this is just once per session. I don't always use it in every session. Sometimes you just don't use it at all, but there's something really cool about rolling for a 3rd time and classing that roll as the fated moment. That was the fated dice roll. That moment was always going to happen, a fixed point in time, as one of my players says. And as I said, I'm the god of gods, all right? If the GM wants it, it's happening. Deal with it. And sneak peek, I might be working on my own archetype variant rule called True Archetypes. I do need to do a bunch of playtesting with it, but I may release it to the public at some point. Watch this space, as they say. Right, I think that is going to do it for my top house rules. Hopefully this breakdown helped narrow down some fun mechanics that give you a few interesting ideas to pitch to your own GM to spice up your next campaign. Thank you very much for watching the video. Please press that hype button, the like button, share with a friend or a GM, and consider subscribing. It really helps out the channel and makes me smile. As ever, I'd like to give a shout out to my artist Leandro Notado. Check the description for a link to his portfolio, and then I'd like to thank my archivists and members: Max Magnus 20019, Ozzy Smith, Nikolai Milenkovic, Kyle Travis, Bentfair, Apteryx13, and patrons and archivists Clash, Q, and Patrick O'Donoghue. But for now, this is Dominic of the Demonemicen, wishing you a fond farewell, and until next time, goodbye.